Hello, and welcome to Bedrock Wisdom, a show in which we seek to understand the many ideas, religious and secular, that unite us. I am your host, Tyler. This is episode 2, Compassion. In an article released by an organization called Random Acts of Kindness, kindness has a number of factors to it. Not just factors, but benefits, we'll say. First of all, kindness is teachable. Now, I don't know, maybe different people have had different experiences than me. And maybe I'm not the nicest guy in the world, but I think I'm a pretty nice guy. But let's just say, raising kids, I am aware that certain social interactions do not just come naturally to everybody. So kindness can be one of those things. And I guess to a certain extent, kindness might have some cultural factors to it, depending on where you live. Though there is, I have to believe, a pretty universal underlying idea of what being kind is. Anyways, my point is, it is teachable. It's something that's teachable, and it should be taught. As it is taught, as people understand what it means to be kind, and there's a lot of factors that go into that, like considering somebody else's feelings, which can be easy to overlook for probably all of us at some point or another. That things like that are going to play into it. Think about how others are feeling. Think about how your decisions are going to affect other people. Is what you're doing a net positive in the world, or positive at all? Different things like that. Fortunately, as I said, it is teachable. Another thing that it is it's contagious. Now, I have to assume I'm not the only one who's seen these videos online, but thinking of kindness as a contagious type of thing, I think about these videos where some, ordinary people are out and about and something pretty minor happens. Maybe this person's walking down the street and they drop $1 or their wallet or something. And another person notices it, and so they go and they let the person know. They pick up the wallet and they hand it to them, right? Something, hopefully most people would consider doing in that situation. Maybe not. I think a lot of people would, though. Anyways, so person hands the wallet over, and then it cuts over to another scene, and then the person who had the wallet returned to them is in another situation. Maybe somebody's about to step out on the curb as a bicycle is coming by and saves them from getting clipped by the bicycle, right? Anyway, so the person who had received the kindness is now returning the kindness in another situation. And then you'll see in these videos, they'll go from one person to the next, just showing how being kind can be contagious. And I, even though they're cheesy, they're corny, I think they really are very, very touching for a legitimate reason. I think they touch at something that's very human. So I'd like to believe that most of us, being treated with kindness and selflessness by another person, I'd like to think that most of us would feel a stronger desire to return that, whether it's to that same person or to someone else. So there you go. Kindness is contagious. Some other things that it does on a physiological level, it increases oxytocin. Oxytocin is a chemical in the brain, and oxytocin has some effects on the body, such as lowering blood pressure, increasing self-esteem, and optimism. Being kind also can increase your energy. If you've ever done something for someone else, while it might seem like an inconvenience at the beginning, I know I've had opportunities to do like service projects and things like that. And ultimately I enjoyed doing what I was doing. So I can attest to that it can bring energy. I kind of skipped ahead there. Kindness also brings happiness. I think it can, it adds a little extra hope into the world. It puts a little extra hope out there, hope in humanity. We hear a lot about all the negative things going on in the world and all the terrible ways people treat other people. And it feels like that's the baseline, but news has a tendency to gear towards the tragic and the upsetting, so they can get more clicks or sales or whatever it is. But really, I believe that there is a lot more good in the world than there is bad. And if we can recognize that, and if we can be part of that, I think we will feel an increased sense of happiness. Another thing is that it can increase lifespan, which I found really interesting. I hadn't really thought about that before, but they've done studies where they've looked at people who have done volunteer work, and I'm guessing probably people that did more than like a day volunteer work in their life, but people that have spent a fair amount of time volunteering throughout their life actually had a higher chance of having a longer lifespan. Pretty cool. Kindness can also increase pleasure. It actually lights up the brain's pleasure and reward centers. And it can increase serotonin. Serotonin is another chemical that allows you to calm down. It actually helps your body in healing itself. And serotonin just gives you an added sense of happiness, or happiness maybe in general. Anyways, all those are actual effects from, kindness. And I'm sure this is by giving and receiving, kindness. Other things that it does is it decreases pain by producing endorphins. It decreases stress. Chemically, it or hormonally, I guess I should say, it decreases cortisol, which is the stress hormone, or a stress hormone. And, by factor of everything we've talked about, it shouldn't be a surprise that it decreases anxiety, depression, and blood pressure. So I just wanted to touch on a few figures, or a couple, I should say, religious figures who embody kindness and compassion. Now, I did say that the episode was called Compassion, and then I went and talked about kindness. There actually is a slight difference, and I'll kind of emphasize that later, but let's just say that compassion has an added element of action that goes along with it. So one figure that I've recently learned about, I think, I've seen images of this, never really understood. It was just some, in my mind, my biased mind, it was just some weird other culture thing that didn't really make sense to me. And I hadn't really paid attention to it before. But now I have, and I'm actually was quite intrigued. Anyways, enough about me. Let's talk about Avalokiteshvara. It's a mouthful, I know, at least for an English speaker. Avalokiteshvara is a figure that appears in many different schools of Buddhism. Avalokiteshvara actually takes on many different forms in, depictions, art, statues, paintings, all that. You can't really ever just look at one and know that, oh, that's this one person, because this person is portrayed so differently. It can be a man, can be a woman, could be rich, could be poor, could be, basically kind of just covers the whole gamut. One portrayal of Avalokiteshvara is particularly striking. And if you've ever seen it, you know what I'm talking about. It is a person, a human figure, with 1,000 arms, and sometimes it's portrayed with 11 heads, which, if you have no idea what that is, that probably just seems very odd to you, very, confusing. But there's actually a really interesting story behind that. So according to the story, Avalokiteshvara was someone who had reached enlightenment, but instead of being released from the cycle of rebirth that comes with enlightenment, he or she opted to continue the cycle until all sentient beings were enlightened. There are figures within Buddhism that take on this role of someone who has decided, even though they reached enlightenment, to essentially stay behind to help others also reach enlightenment. This figure, as I mentioned, is particularly interesting because he decided that he wouldn't be done until all sentient beings were able to reach it. So after many lifetimes, right, because they believe in rebirth, the Hindu and Buddhist cosmology, we're all reborn over and over again until we reach enlightenment. So after many lifetimes of struggling to perform this task, the struggle to comprehend all of the suffering in the world was just too much, and his head split into 11 pieces. Now, here he is in this compromised position when his teacher comes walking by and finds him there, and with his head, broken apart. Well, his teacher decides to give him 11 heads, and the idea was that he could now hear and comprehend all of the cries of suffering in the world. So with this newfound ability, Avalokiteshvara continues to attempt to reach out to help all of these suffering beings, but because there's so much and so many, his arms shattered into many pieces, similar to the previous experience. And his teacher once again returns, and he gives him 1,000 arms with which to aid all suffering beings. And sometimes you'll even see in some depictions all the palms of the hands of all of the on all of these arms. The palms will each have an eye, like an eye to see on them. As I mentioned before, Avalokiteshvara is depicted in many different forms for a reason. And the reason is that one person can't be everywhere and do everything for everyone. We need help, right? And there's a lot of suffering in the world. So the point that I take away from this is that every time a person does something to ease the suffering of another being, it's as if the spirit of Avalokiteshvara is present. We can all be one of those arms reaching out to help someone to ease that suffering. We can all be part of that process, which is, I mean, a beautiful thought and very, very true. So now I want to talk about Jesus for a bit. Jesus, if you're familiar with the story, he spends his ministry traveling around many parts of the country. He goes from one village to another, serving others, teaching, performing miracles in the scripture. Anyways, he's all over the place. And in a very interesting story, he is out and about, and somebody finds him and informs him that his friend Lazarus is back home on his deathbed. He's on the brink of death. And Jesus, he eventually ends up making his way back to the village to see this friend. But because, it takes a long time to walk everywhere, and he's not even in the same village, it takes him multiple days to arrive to where his friend's at. And by the time he gets there, the friend's sister comes out to meet Jesus and informs him that her brother has died. He's passed away, and she's just heartbroken. She's just crying, heartbroken over the death of her brother. And it's in these following verses, the following part of the story here, that we probably get the most human glimpse, the glimpse that shows us Jesus' humanity most clearly. And it's one of the shortest verses, but probably one of the most poignant verses in the New Testament. In response to the death of his friend and the heartbreak of the sister, it simply says, Jesus wept. Jesus wept. The story goes on to explain that Jesus went forth to the tomb of his friend and called on him to arise. And the friend, Lazarus, arises and walks out of the tomb, raised from the dead. Now, whether you believe that to be literal or not, it doesn't really take away from what I see as the most poignant part of this whole story, and that is the sense of empathy that we get from this revered person. This is compassion, right? This is like true love for another. Now, as I said, compassion and kindness aren't exactly the same thing. There's an article in Greater Good magazine from Berkeley that says, quote, compassion literally means to suffer together. Among emotion researchers, it is defined as the feeling that arises when you are confronted with another's suffering and feel motivated to relieve that suffering. End quote. That's what I think of when I think of the story of Avalokiteshvara, right? This person had strived and put in all of this self-work and energy and effort for, according to the story, lifetimes in order to reach nirvana or enlightenment. But the idea of leaving the world to continue in suffering, it just wasn't good enough. And he decided to extend his time, to put in the effort to actually help others with their suffering, or to ease their suffering. That's compassion. That's action, right? That's not just, oh, that's so sad, moving on to the next thing. That's, what can I do about that? It's a big difference. In this story with Jesus, let's assume this was just any person who lost their friend, who was watching their friend, their other friend, watching the heartbreak of that person. Sometimes there's only so much you can do. That doesn't mean you can't still have compassion in your heart. In that situation, Jesus, he cries with the sister. He is there with her, and he shares in that suffering. What was it? Compassion means to suffer together. So, maybe you can't always fix the thing, but it doesn't mean you can't practice compassion in a situation. Sometimes that means being with someone who's having a hard time. Sometimes just sitting in silence with somebody who feels alone. Maybe they don't want to talk. Maybe they're just struggling with something that you really can't change. But just being there actually can have a powerful effect on that person's mental health. Compassion doesn't always have to be some big extravagant action, or it's not a thing that just counts when you fix the problem. It has a lot of applications. But it's about the spirit of it, right? There's some religious parlay for you there. It's about the intention. Really, it's about the intention, the inner intention that's there. In Buddhism, there is a type of meditation practice called metta. And metta sometimes is known as loving kindness meditation. And I'm going to talk about meditation a little bit down the road here. But the idea of metta is that as you're sitting in meditation, you focus your mind on peace, happiness, joy, for yourself and for others. And it's a way of kind of centering your thoughts on that. And while you might say, well, just thinking about stuff, being nice doesn't really help, right? It's like when people say, I'm praying for you. I know sometimes people can be pretty pretty harsh against that sentiment. And if it is just somebody just saying something to say something, I get it. I totally get it. But there is something to say about honing in our focus on the things that mean the most. And so that's kind of what this metta is, right? You put your focus into looking for kindness and compassion, or expressing it, or kind of mentally projecting it out into the world, or to yourself, as I said, which is a very important part too. Anyways, I just thought that was worth mentioning here as well. I have a couple of quotes I'd like to leave with you. as we end here. One of them comes from the Hindu text called the Bhagavad Gita. Says, quote, "When a person responds to the joys and sorrows of others as if they were his own, he has attained the highest state of spiritual union." Unquote. I'll just repeat that one more time. When a person responds to the joys and sorrows of others as if they were his own, he has attained the highest state of spiritual union. And the final quote comes from a Muslim poet named Tarjuman al-Ashwaq, who I believe lived around the 15th, 16th century. And I just want to preface this with just something to think about a little bit here. This is a time when there was a lot of fighting between the Islamic nations and European Christians. Basically fighting between Christians and Muslims. So you can imagine there's probably a lot of bad blood there when this was written, and it just makes it all the more poignant in my mind that this poet would say something so open and kind. Anyways, it says, quote, "O marvel, a garden among the flames. My heart has become capable of all forms. It is a meadow for gazelles and a monastery for Christian monks, a temple for idols and the pilgrim's Kaaba, the tables of the law and the book of the Quran. I profess the religion of love, and whatever direction its steed may take, love is my religion and my faith." Unquote. Thank you for listening. I'll catch up with you next time. Bye.